September 12, 1940, Worth Matravers, Dorset coast. Rain lashed sideways across the English Channel, driven by a cold Atlantic wind that rattled the corrugated tin of the radar hut. Inside, the air crackled with the faint electric hum of overworked machinery. Oscilloscopes blinked dimly through the cigarette haze, their green traces jittering like nervous heartbeats. Britain's chain of radar stations, the nation's eyes against the night bombers, was alive, but tonight one eye was going blind. Edward Taffy Bowen leaned over the transmitter rack, sweat gleaming under the amber light. At 29, his wiry frame and quick Welsh voice made him seem more like a university student than one of Britain's foremost radar minds. But tonight, none of that mattered. The chain-home transmitter had failed dead silent just as Luftwaffe bombers were crossing the channel. "Bowen, she's not coming back online," called out Sergeant Ellis, the duty operator, his voice tight with panic. On the flickering screen, the bright pulses that once tracked incoming Heinkels and Dorniers had flattened to nothing. The coastal radar beam was gone. Bowen didn't answer. He crouched lower, flashlight clamped between his teeth, hands deep inside a maze of wires and glowing vacuum tubes. The transmitter's heart, a fragile web of copper, bakelite, and glass, was overheated, one filament fused through. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burnt dust. Outside, the drone of distant aircraft began to build, low, rhythmic, unmistakable. "We've got 20 minutes before they're over Portsmouth," Ellis said, checking his watch. "We're blind out there, sir." Bowen's mind raced. Replacement parts were days away. Command would order a shutdown, but shutting down meant silence, and silence meant death for hundreds in the blacked-out cities below. He pulled back from the rack, jaw clenched. His eyes darted to a corner of the hut where a pile of broken radio sets lay, discarded civilian pieces, scavenged from the nearby village. A wild idea flickered. "Ellis," Bowen said suddenly, "get me those old Marconi sets, all of them." The sergeant stared, uncertain. "Sir, those are scrap." "Not tonight they are." Within minutes, the hut became a workshop of desperation. Bowen stripped the radios apart with a screwdriver, ripping out coils, condensers, and wiring. The sound of breaking glass mixed with the rhythmic ticking of the clock. His fingers moved fast, connecting scavenged parts directly into the transmitter's open circuitry. "Sir, you can't just." "I can," Bowen cut him off, "and I bloody well have to." Each connection was a gamble. One wrong wire could overload the entire system, or worse, alert the Luftwaffe to their location through a surge of stray emissions. But Bowen wasn't thinking of risk. He was thinking of range, the radar's range, and how to stretch it beyond anything it had ever achieved. He reconfigured the transmitter's oscillation frequency, bridging it with a makeshift coupling coil from a wireless receiver. The calculations were instinctive now, done half in memory, half in madness. The hum of the transmitter deepened. A thin spark leapt from the contact point. "Power her up," Bowen shouted. Ellis hesitated, then threw the main switch. The lights dimmed. The radar's heartbeat returned, faint at first, then stronger. On the scope, a single bright pulse appeared, then another, then dozens. Ellis blinked. Good God, they're back. Bowen leaned in. The blips were distant, farther than he'd ever seen before. "What's the range on that trace?" he asked quietly. "Just over 100 miles, Ellis whispered, disbelief in his voice. "Sir, we've never hit that distance before." Bowen exhaled slowly, feeling the thrum of the equipment through the floorboards. Somewhere out there, in the black skies over the channel, German bombers were flying straight into Britain's gaze, a gaze held together by scavenged radio parts and one engineer's defiance of failure. He looked at the glowing screen, its green arcs sweeping methodically. For now, Britain's eyes were open again. And the enemy had no idea. Against the clock. The storm hadn't let up. Rain hammered the tin roof like 1,000 ticking clocks counting down to impact. Inside the radar hut, the air was thick with heat from the transmitter valves. Every gauge trembled near its limit. Bowen stood over the control console, sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Ellis, plot those echoes again. I want confirmation this isn't phantom noise." The sergeant adjusted the dials, his hand unsteady. "They're real, sir, bearing 180 to 215, multiple contacts, altitude unknown." Bowen's heart kicked. That was the southern approach, the bomber route to Portsmouth. "Then we've got them." He turned to the telephone switchboard and lifted the receiver. Chain home command, Worth Matravers calling. We have confirmed tracks, repeat, confirmed tracks 105 miles out. Static hissed, then a clipped voice answered. Impossible range, Worth Matravers, recheck your calibration. Bowen's jaw tightened. It's not a calibration error, we've extended the signal temporarily. He caught Ellis's uneasy glance. Transmit this to fighter command immediately. There was silence on the line, then, copy, Worth Matravers, forwarding now. The connection clicked dead. Bowen exhaled and set the receiver down. For a moment the only sound was the steady thrum of the generator outside. Ellis finally spoke. Sir, they'll want to know how you did that. Bowen wiped his hands on a rag. Then they'll have to wait until after the war. He wasn't supposed to modify government radar equipment. Everything about his fix was unauthorized, dangerous, even. The transmitter now ran at nearly twice its rated capacity, and the scavenged components weren't built for this voltage. But if it held through the night, hundreds of civilians might live to see morning. Suddenly, a voice burst through the loudspeaker, the watch post on the cliffs. Control, we have visual on enemy flares over Swanage. Repeat, enemy aircraft dropping flares over the coast. Ellis's head snapped toward the door. They're here. Bowen felt a chill despite the heat. Keep tracking, don't lose those returns. Outside, the first rumble of anti-aircraft guns echoed along the coastline. The hut flickered with the orange glow of distant explosions. Through the narrow window, the sky was a patchwork of fire and darkness. The radar scope danced. Bright pulses bloomed and vanished, replaced by new ones in rapid succession. The Luftwaffe's main force was sweeping in, dozens of bombers, tight formations closing fast. Ellis muttered, that's more than 20 contacts. 40, Bowen corrected, eyes fixed on the display, and climbing. He grabbed the field phone again. Command, this is Worth Matravers. Multiple tracks confirmed, at least 40 bombers inbound on bearing 185. Estimated landfall in 15 minutes. Scramble fighters now. A long pause, then, understood, Worth Matravers, fighter command acknowledges, stay on them. Bowen hung up. His hands were trembling now, though not from fear, from strain, from knowing the machine in front of him wasn't supposed to work, yet it was performing beyond anything the Air Ministry believed possible. The valves glowed white-hot, one beginning to pulse irregularly. Bowen stepped closer, listening to the hiss and buzz of the circuits. Hold together, old girl, he whispered, just a few more hours. Outside, the wind carried the faint drone of engines. The German bombers were overhead. Ellis's eyes darted to the window. Sir, what if they hit us? Bowen didn't look up. Then at least they'll know we were watching. At that moment, the radar scope flared with a new echo, faster, higher, cutting through the formation. Ellis frowned. What's that? Bowen smiled faintly. Hurricanes, our boys are up. Through the static, distant radio chatter began to bleed into the hut-coded transmissions from fighter command. The RAF had seen them coming, and they were ready. For a moment, Bowen allowed himself to breathe. His unapproved, jury-rigged transmitter had bought them time, a precious, irreplaceable time. Then, a deep pop from the transmitter made him flinch. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the side panel. The makeshift coil had begun to melt. Ellis shouted, it's overheating. Bowen grabbed a wrench and lunged forward. We're not losing her now. He ripped the side casing open and began adjusting the contacts, sweat streaming down his face as the smell of burnt insulation filled the air. Sparks snapped inches from his hand. The hum dropped to a dangerous low, then rose again. The green line on the screen steadied. Ellis stared at the display wide-eyed. It's still running. Bowen straightened slowly, chest heaving. Then so are we. Outside, the thunder of British engines rolled across the night sky, proof that his impossible fix had reached them in time. The longest night. Previous section text. By midnight, the storm had cleared. In its place, the dull orange glow of distant fires shimmered along the southern horizon. Britain's coast was burning again, but this time the defenders had struck back. Inside the radar hut, the tension was relentless. Every few minutes, another report came through the wireless. Enemy formation broken, 2 bombers down over Portsmouth, hurricanes returning to base. Bowen slumped in his chair, sleeves blackened with soot, his hair damp with sweat. He'd been on his feet for 6 hours straight, coaxing the transmitter to life with nothing more than scavenged wires and blind faith. Ellis poured him a cup of lukewarm tea from a dented kettle. "You should get some rest, sir." Bowen shook his head. "Not yet, she's holding, but if those valves give out." A sudden crackle of interference filled the hut. The scope flickered, then stabilized. The echo line swept clean across the screen, revealing faint blips, single, scattered returns, survivors heading home. "They're retreating," Ellis murmured. Bowen didn't respond. His gaze lingered on the faintest trace, a single contact, miles offshore, moving erratically. "That one's limping," he muttered, "could be damaged." Ellis frowned. "Should we track it?" Bowen nodded. "All the way back to France if we can." For the next hour, they watched in silence as the contact drifted southeast, until finally it vanished beyond the radar's edge. The machine had done its job. Against every regulation, against every expectation, it had seen farther than anyone believed possible. The door creaked open and a gust of cold sea air swept through. Sergeant Harker, a liaison from Fighter Command, stepped in, his greatcoat dripping wet. "You're still operational?" he asked, astonished. "Barely," Bowen said, "but yes." Harker looked around at the chaotic state of the hut, the open transmitter casing, the scorched wiring, the heap of dismantled radio sets on the floor. "What in God's name did you do to this place?" "Kept the lights on," Bowen said simply. Harker handed him a folded telegram. "From Fighter Command HQ, they wanted you to see this." Bowen unfolded it carefully. The message was short. "Interception successful, 23 enemy aircraft destroyed, chain home stations credited, Worth Matravers radar fix critical to detection." Ellis let out a low whistle. "You did it, sir." Bowen exhaled slowly, reading the words again. He felt an odd mixture of pride and exhaustion. "We did it," he corrected. The transmitter gave a tired groan as if in agreement. One of the scavenged condensers finally split open with a soft hiss, releasing a puff of smoke. Bowen laughed quietly. "She's telling us she's done." The next morning, a gray dawn broke over the Dorset cliffs. The radar masts stood silhouetted against the pale sky, their steel arms dripping with dew. The war would rage on for years, but for this one night, Britain had seen the enemy coming. Later that week, officials from the Air Ministry arrived, clipboards in hand, inspecting the damaged equipment with expressions of horror. "You rewired a government radar transmitter," one officer said incredulously, "using civilian scrap radios?" Bowen stood quietly, hands in his coat pockets. "It worked." The officer glared. "It was unauthorized, dangerous. You could have blown the entire station." "Or," Bowen replied, his tone calm but sharp, "we could have gone blind while the bombers flattened half the coast." There was silence. Then one of the older officers, a grizzled man with RAF insignia on his lapel, stepped forward. "Sometimes," he said, "war doesn't wait for permission." Bowen met his eyes. The man nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Carry on, Mr. Bowen." That night, as the radar hut settled into uneasy quiet, Bowen sat beside the transmitter, the faint glow of the remaining valves washing over his face. Outside, waves broke gently against the rocks. He thought of the people in Portsmouth, the mothers, the firemen, the searchlight crews, all alive because a handful of engineers refused to accept failure. He reached over and patted the side of the transmitter, its metal warm beneath his hand. "You saved them," he whispered. And for once the machine stayed silent, content, perhaps, in knowing it had done the impossible. The chain home network would continue to evolve, stronger, faster, more refined. But the story of that night, when one man rewired Britain's eyes under the shadow of the Blitz, would live quietly in the background of victory. Edward Taffy Bowen never spoke much about what happened at Worth Matravers. The war went on and he moved to other projects, other frontiers of radar. But those who were there, who watched the blips return to the screen when all hope seemed lost, never forgot the man who refused to let Britain go blind.